From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Rosie Wright.
It feels like your house is on fire and you're dying in it. You accept any help because no matter what, you are going to die.
In January, people in every single province of Iran were shouting for help, demonstrating against the regime in what was the bloodiest uprising in a generation. The US president said help was on the way, but it didn't come in January. Over the weekend, US-Israeli strikes were unleashed across Iran, killing Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, in the process. Iranians took to the streets again. Now, in some quarters, they were gathering to mourn. And in others, they're celebrating. Without the supreme leader, this leaves huge questions as to what happens next. For those who were crying out for regime change in January, will President Trump's intervention now be the catalyst they were waiting for?
When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations.
If Iranians take that chance and are successful, what will happen if the regime collapses? What or who is waiting to replace it?
I think people have to start thinking, it's possible, rather than constantly think, oh my God, it's all a disaster. Someone said that we dislike Trump so much that we're willing for him to fail here in order to prove our point. Actually, it'll be a disaster if he fails. I mean, we really need him to succeed.
We hear from two experts from Iran about what could happen next. The story today, Iran after the Ayatollah.
No one agrees with one another about what's going on and what's the right thing to do. So there's these ongoing debates, mostly very heated amongst many Iranians.
Rana Rahimpour is an Iranian journalist, formerly a presenter on BBC Persia, who's now living in exile in London. Well, since the attacks on Saturday, her community in the diaspora have been coming to terms with one of the most momentous events in her country's history.
I think we have to start with the 8th and 9th of January when many Iranians went on the streets and they were massacred by the Islamic Republic. Some would say that probably 30,000 protesters were massacred by the regime, and it made people reach a point of no return with the regime. So those who were in Iran said that despite the fact that they don't want war, but they can't always also find an exit from the stalemate. So they were waiting for this to happen. They were expecting this to happen. A lot of people were piling food and cash at home, and they all had a bag, a suitcase, ready to leave when the bombs started falling. The internet has been down since the beginning of the invasion. I haven't been able to have any contact with my relatives inside the country since the beginning of the war. But the emotions are very complex. The people were caught between a murderous, extremist Islamic Republic, and on the other hand, Israeli and American bombs. This is going to be a very costly war for Iranians and the ordinary Iranians who were already suffering as a result of sanctions and the mismanagement of the economy under the regime. But it's very difficult to see how they can get out of this. The talks of regime change by President Trump is very naive. in the view of many Iranians when he invites people to go out on the street while the country is being bombed. Would anyone with any sanity would go and protest on the street while there are constant attacks on every part of the country? So it's a moment of confusion, fear, and apprehension.
Is there any relief in that mix?
Maybe on Sunday morning when we heard that the Iranian supreme leader was killed in an American and Israeli attack, there was a moment of pause. A lot of people got happy. They were celebrating on the streets. But that happiness comes together with grief and together with worry, because we know that the regime is not over yet. We don't know how the regime will be over. And it's also frustrating to see how his supporters are now holding him as a martyr, a very brave leader who stood with the promise of fighting the West. And a lot of people say he didn't deserve this. He deserved to stand trial and face the people. But that didn't happen.
You're watching on here in London.
Mm-hmm.
What was your response on Sunday morning?
I felt a bit numb, to be honest, Rosie. We are still grieving the death of a lot of people last month. So we haven't had a chance to just come above the water and catch our breath. And then suddenly he's dead, but the system is still in place, and the system can even be more violent than one individual.
Can you help us understand sort of the figurehead of this regime has been taken out, but to what extent can you divorce sort of the actual individual from the regime as a whole?
It's a very difficult question because he was the supreme leader for 30 years and this regime has been around for 47 years. So we really don't know the Islamic Republic without Ali Khamenei. He was very stubborn and very, very traumatized as an individual and very paranoid about everything other than his own circle. So his death will definitely shift things and will bring about change, but I'm not sure whether that change is going to be a change for better or a change for worse. He definitely had a lot of charisma, as we've seen the outpouring of his supporters crying and beating themselves. And the system is very well embedded in the country. And those who are involved with the system are either ideologically very intertwined with it or financially very intertwined with it. And there are many of them who would do anything to keep it in power. And that's why it can even get worse than what it was before. So it can become more violent, it can become more radical. And that's one of my main concerns.
We hear often this sort of phrase of life under the Iranian regime. Can you just explain, unpack a little bit more what that means in practice?
Just to give you an example, in January, the Iranian currency lost its value. And it meant that the price of cooking oil was tripled overnight. And then it meant that a lot of people could no longer afford their basic commodities. They went out on the streets and they were massacred. Many of them were put in prison. Hundreds of thousands were arrested. The government shut down the internet. We had no knowledge of what was going on inside. And then one individual who was looking for a loved one at a morgue filmed the morgue where there were piles and piles of dead bodies in black body bags. And that individual drove hundreds of kilometers to a neighboring country of Iran to send that video. It was a 16-minute video that just shocked everyone to show how many people this regime had killed in 2 days. A lot of people were arrested. A lot of people haven't even found their loved ones who were protesting. Many are probably in mass graves already. Many are being executed in silence because if you haven't found your child, they could either be in prison or they might have been killed in those protests.
And that is the regime that Donald Trump is sort of giving this rallying cry to the Iranians, say, go out, this is your moment, you might not get this chance again.
To the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond. America is backing you with overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach.
And I know it's really difficult to get information from your contacts because of the internet blackout. But, you know, we're hearing some reports of Iranians receiving messages saying you'll be met if you go out and demonstrate with the iron fist of the Revolutionary Guard. Are we seeing people who feel able to repeat what happened in January and go out and raise their voice?
To be honest, it's very unlikely, Rosie, because a lot of people have left the major cities. So the population that was there in January is no longer there. They have found shelters and have gone to less populated areas. So to begin with, you need the masses to come out on the streets. That's why I feel it's so bizarre that Trump and Netanyahu are asking people to go on the street. There's no one left in Tehran who can go on the streets.
Do you think that's naive for them to suggest that then?
It's so naive. It's stupid. Because then at the same time, you're bombing the country. Who would risk their lives to either be shot at by the regime or bombed at by Israel or the United States? If you are stupid enough to risk your life like that, you may end up in prison. So that's the point that I don't get. They keep coming out, oh, we have created a vacuum for you to come out and retake power. How?
It's really interesting. We started this conversation that you said there is no agreement of what to do next. What are kind of the ideas of Iranians as to what to do?
At the moment, they're just holding their breath. There's this general consensus that there's nothing the people can do anymore. The people didn't want this regime. The people didn't want this war. They didn't want any of this. They just wanted to live like the rest of us.
What might they be waiting for?
A collapse of the regime. Maybe they're hoping that the establishment will be bombed enough that it will collapse, which is difficult to know how it will unfold and how it will come about, because history has showed us that aerial bombardment doesn't change regimes. So it's very difficult. It's very, very grim.
Do you think, the contacts that you're speaking to, are they grateful for Trump's intervention?
They're not grateful. I don't think they're grateful, but they're desperate for it. They feel that there was no other options left, even though they didn't want it. So it's interesting, an example that some people, because we had this argument with a lot of Iranians over the last couple of weeks since it appeared that there will be an invasion. And those who were asking for a military intervention said, it feels like your house is on fire and you're dying in it. You accept any help because no matter what, you are going to die in the fire. And when you ask for help, you might die anyway, but there might be a hope of not dying. So it doesn't mean anyone wants to be bombed, but some people, and again, I don't say everyone, there are people who are against the invasion, but some people are so desperate and so fed up and so hopeless that they're hoping that these bombs might change things. And a lot of people have already given up on the idea of a democracy after this. They just want change and they just want this regime to go. But the big question is how.
And what it would be replaced by. Who would you say that people are looking to? Is there a figurehead?
So there isn't an obvious figurehead inside the country. There is another controversial figurehead, and I wouldn't even call him a figurehead. He's a hopeful candidate whom Israel has invested in for years, and his name is Reza Pahlavi, who's the son of Iran's former king, Shah.
They trust me as a transitional leader, not as the future king or future president or future whatever. I'm totally focused on my mission in life, which is let me bring the country to a point that they can make that free choice. That will be enough for me having said mission accomplished.
And out of desperation, a lot of people in January protests started calling his name. And by a lot of people, I really don't know how many, because what we get is based on the videos that we receive. But it shows that his support has grown over the years, mostly because there are no other options left. The regime has put most of the opposition in prison, under house arrest. So it's very difficult for people to be politically active whilst inside the country. But he's a very controversial character, and I'm not sure how widespread his base is in Iran.
The difficulty, as you mentioned that, is what is the alternative?
We don't know. We know that there are parts of the establishment that are open to normalize relations with the West. Not right now, because right now is not the moment to negotiate. So the Islamic Republic is trying to take revenge for the death of its leader. But eventually, I think it's much more sensible to find someone who understands the system and can bring those who are very religious and ideologically close to the system along, rather than turning them into very die-hard radical enemies that then can cause a lot of trouble, not just for Iran, but for the entire region.
I'm Ali Ansari. I am Professor of Iranian History at the University of St Andrews.
So tell us from your perspective, Ali, what is Iran like today without its supreme leader?
Well, it depends on your perspective. I mean, if you're among his devotees, it's probably going to feel a little bit empty and shallow. There's obviously deep grief and shock from those who are keen supporters, but probably for the majority of people, I would say as was always with these things, probably disinterest. Not many people are that interested in him. And then for those who are opponents, of which I think this is a growing section of the population, there's absolute elation. So it's a very divided society. How the balance of that division goes is a matter of debate. I would think probably that those who are devotees of the system are in the minority, and in quite a striking minority.
And what political situation has been left? Who's in charge right now?
Well, that's also interesting. And we now have a three-man leadership council, including, I believe, the president, the head of the judiciary, and one other, I have to say, rather nondescript cleric, Ayatollah, not a Sayyid, not a black turbaned cleric, so not one ostensibly descended from the Prophet. So I don't think actually that candidate is going to be the person who will be nominated as supreme leader. But it seems to me that the process of selecting or electing or whatever the next supreme leader is going to be a somewhat a more protracted one than people think, partly because obviously the environment is not very conducive. I don't think 88 clerics want to gather in one place to make that decision at the moment. If you want to put 88 senior, rather aging clerics together in a room to decide who's going to become the new supreme leader, that's obviously a very, very juicy target for some aspiring pilot.
If the regime does want to continue, there was sort of a succession plan put in place, wasn't there? I mean, the supreme leader was 86, I think.
A lot of this is exaggerated, by the way. I mean, I have to say, I mean, some of the commentary going on about Iran now you would think actually that the Islamic Republic is one of the most institutionally robust and rooted organizations in the world. In fact, it's highly personalized. I mean, it has been highly personalized for a very long time because Khamenei basically made everything rotate around him. But I don't think, there's a debate as to how deep that process goes. And one of the things that's come out recently, for instance, there was the case that the Iranians had suddenly, for reasons that are not entirely explicable, decided to attack Oman. And this has obviously caused outrage in Oman, given all the hard work they've done to try and mediate. And the foreign minister, Araghchi, actually got on to I think it was with CBS, I can't remember now, and said that, one of the problems we have is that we're not actually in contact with all our military units, and the military units are following orders and just getting on with it and choosing their own targets. And what he's basically saying is that command and control has broken down. I mean, it's, the idea that, it would seem sensible to attack the one Arab country in the region who'd actually been trying to help mediate a solution is absurd. So what does that tell us? I mean, it tells us that actually this sort of level of planning and whatever and the structure of it is not quite as robust as they would like to present it and how some people in the West have interpreted it.
So what do you think the reality might be then?
I think the reality is the system is breaking down. I mean, it's been breaking down politically and economically long before now. You wouldn't have to slaughter, between 10 and 20,000 people back in January. I mean, the figures are debatable, but I'm happy to sit between 10 and 20,000 people at least. You would have to slaughter that sort of number of people if the system was robust, legitimate, and everyone actually consented to it in one way or form. They don't have to love it, but they just wanted to live with it. It's quite clear that's not what's happening. The economy is in disarray. The currency is in the process of collapse. By the way, none of this is going to help, by the way. I mean, this is one of the more absurd situations that we find ourselves in. That Iran's strategy at the moment is to basically make the region burn. But the first place it's going to burn is itself. I mean, it's a fairly sort of chaotic situation. They're obviously very shocked, very discombobulated. Of course they would be. I mean, why wouldn't you be when your supreme leader gets knocked out with such precision, by the way? And here's the other point that people don't seem to buy into. Somehow, someone from within the leadership's office was able to take a picture of the body and send it to Israel within minutes to sort of as proof of death. Now, what does that tell us? I mean, it tells us that Israeli penetration and infiltration of the highest levels of the Iranian establishment is intact.
So would you say the establishment is sort of losing grip then?
Yes. I mean, there's little doubt that it is. What you're seeing now is, I mean, they are doing their best to present their best foot forward. It's early days, of course. I mean, let's not exaggerate and say the whole thing is necessarily on the verge of collapse. But the fact is, I think there will be a lot of questions being asked throughout the hierarchy about, what are we doing? Where are we going? Is there an off-ramp? Obviously, publicly, they're not going to want to say this. The only thing they can say is that we're going to fight till the end, because their argument really is that, Donald Trump will tire before we do. The problem with their current strategy, of course, is by basically inflaming the rest of the Arab world against them, they have multiplied their problem.
So help sort of draw the lines out for us. Who are Iran's allies right now?
Well, I can tell you that the Russians and the Chinese have basically said, they're not going to do anything. The only country that seems to have said something, but here's the twist, is Pakistan. So Pakistan has basically said that they're going to stick by Iran and they're going to stick by Saudi Arabia. So I don't know which one they're going to stick with. I mean, obviously those are countries on two different sides of the divide. I mean, nobody else has really come out. The Turks are obviously going to keep neutral and keep out of it, as of course, they should. And the Iranians are not going to provoke the Turks. So in some ways, there's a possibility there that the Turks may provide some sort of mediation off-ramp at the end of the day. But, all that we need now, frankly, is for the Iranians somehow to launch a couple of missiles into Turkey. And I mean, that will really, be the last nail in the coffin. But it's, I don't think they really have any friends. I mean, not any friends that are meaningful. I mean, let's put it that way. I mean, I think the Russians and the Chinese have essentially told them they're on their own.
And what about sort of Hezbollah, the Houthis?
Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility. I mean, Hezbollah has obviously launched a couple of rockets, but they've also been, someone pointed out, they're not the force they were. Again, none of this would have happened had, the last 24 months not taken place and the defanging of the axis of resistance. But also none of it would have happened without the uprising in January. So Hezbollah has said something, and the Lebanese government has basically come in and said Hezbollah must stop. I think there's a very strong divide here, and I think it's becoming blatantly apparent that the Arab Sunni states essentially are gathering together an alliance against Iran as a Shia state. And it's a tragedy on many different levels. I mean, for Iran, it's an extraordinary situation for them to have found themselves in, and an extraordinary situation in which they made it much worse for themselves. I mean, this is the bizarreness of it.
How long can Iran keep fighting for in terms of what we know about their their defensive and their attacking capabilities?
Well, a lot of this will depend. I mean, it depends on when they run out of munitions. So, I mean, they're firing a lot by the sounds of it. But what's most interesting about it is that quite a lot of it is being shot out of the sky. Now, one of the interesting things for me, and I would say is a sort of a strategic mistake by them, is they've been firing so much into the Arab states. And the UAE, for instance, has taken great pride in announcing that it shot down much of the stuff coming its way. So there's an issue of when the Iranians will run out on that front. And then the other thing is really what happens on the ground in Iran. I mean, if the Israeli-American onslaught continues, and bear in mind we're in day 2, of what may be a campaign of several weeks. And the US and Israel have air supremacy across Iran. I mean, we basically knew that from last June, right? Nothing's happened, apparently, in order to rebuild Iran's air defenses. All that bluster they gave in the last 6 months, utterly meaningless. The Israelis and the Americans are bombing at will, effectively, and they're damaging basically a lot of regime infrastructure, the militia units, the IRGC, that's all being pounded. And sooner or later, that will create the space for the uprising to continue. But again, that depends on what the Iranians on the ground do. If recent experience is anything to go by, there will be an uprising.
It sounds as though, then, that you are sort of anticipating or maybe optimistic that what Donald Trump wants to engineer, which is that he will keep striking in order to facilitate regime change, that might actually be possible.
Well, I would never use the word optimism in any of this, by the way, but I would say, and this is what I have said to people, I've said a lot of assumptions will be challenged over the next few weeks. I think we're all coming in with certain preconceptions and certain assumptions. The ghost of Iraq hangs heavy on all of us. I quite understand all that. But the reality of the fact is that the situation in Iran has its own distinct characteristics, and we need to bear that in mind going forward. And as I said, and I've said to people, if we look at it from the perspective of the ground up in Iran, it looks different from the way we look at it, which is essentially going to Washington or whatever and sort of like, berating Trump. The fact is that, from the Iranian perspective on the ground, they couldn't care less about Washington or Trump or anything else. They're worried about their own liberty and their own freedom, and they want to free themselves from these shackles. I do think that we just have to be a bit more open to the possibility that this is how it will unfold, actually. And if it does, of course, Trump's gamble will have to some extent. I don't want to exaggerate it because I still think it'll be quite messy, by the way. But Trump's gamble may have worked.
Rana was saying to us earlier that there is this sort of real nervousness from the people of Iran, and they're sort of right now holding and waiting rather than sort of rallying to say, okay, right now is the moment.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as I said, it's early days. And one of the reasons, by the way, of course, is that, back in the uprising in January, there were these calls that Trump was saying, right, I'm coming, aid is coming, and it didn't happen. So they just want to wait. It's a natural, reaction to them. They'll say, well, let's just see, what if Trump suddenly does cut a deal with the regime? I mean, I think the Iranians are quite sensible to this. I mean, you've got to just wait and see. But the tipping point will come. I mean, it will come. But I think Rana is absolutely right. And I think Iranians are probably anxious, nervous, apprehensive, but also quite excited in some way.
You mentioned that. I mean, there are suggestions, or from Tehran at least, saying, look, we'd like to have talks with the US president. What do you think that would actually engineer if those talks did come to fruition?
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends if you believe, there's a lot of information, people saying that the Iranians want talks. The Iranians are saying the Americans are desperate to have peace and this sort of thing. I mean, at the moment, the regime, I don't think would be able to come to any sort of agreement. Now, I think what Trump is basically angling for and what people are saying is that, let's say, a new constellation of leaders come out. Now, it could be under the, quote, the rubric of the Islamic Republic. I mean, it might still exist, but it could be a series of leaders who are generally seen as part of the dissident wing of the Islamic Republic. Now, they could come out, including, Mir Hossein Mousavi, who was the Green Movement leader, who's been under house arrest for the last, 16 years. He's very old, by the way, but he's possibly someone who could come in. There's Nargis Mohammadi in Evin prison. There's Nasrin Sotoudeh. These are human rights and Nobel laureates and others. If they came out within the rubric, in a sense, of the Islamic Republic, and then, were part of a coalition, shall we say, in a leadership coalition, that way could be a means and a ways where a new settlement could be reached. But, that would basically be a stopgap on the route to where the regime would change, by the way. I mean, that's what would happen. But, obviously the people on the ground are going to have to wait and see how that pans out. I don't think it will happen. I mean, I don't think the regime, for the reasons I said earlier, I mean, in the sense that the command and control, the sort of coherence is beginning to fracture, that it's quite difficult for them to pull, the regime itself, to pull that off at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Is it possible, just from your sort of personal perspective, to try and explain to us the consequence of really what's happened, first of all in January, but then also just the last few days? It looks like sort of short, intense military action that is going to have potentially sort of decades-long repercussions.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I've been arguing this for a while, that people sort of say, oh, the Islamic Republic is that, we have to contain it. It's a bit like saying, the Soviet Union was going to exist forever. None of these states exist forever. In Iran, there's no reason why the political system and the constitution can't change. There may be a new constitution in Iran. I mean, the country is there. Nobody's saying the country's going to vanish. The people will be there. But there'll be a different political system without a sort of clerical hierarchy sort of dictating things but without a revolutionary ideology. Just a country that wishes to get on with its neighbours and wishes to have constructive relationships with the West. And if that's the case, I think it will be a diplomatic revolution, on a par with the disaster of 1979, in which basically the West lost Iran or vice versa. Now would be the Iran coming back in from the cold. The chief loser in all this, by the way, would be Russia. And to be honest, if you look at that, it's in the grand scheme of things, in terms of our war with Ukraine and Russia and whatever, it's not a bad thing if Russia loses out. Not that we're saying that Iran is suddenly going to come in and be a best buddy to the West, but all we want is a country that has a constructive relationship with the West. I mean, and I don't think that's beyond the realms of possibility.
That was Ali Ansari, Professor of Iranian History at the University of St Andrews. And earlier, we heard from the Iranian journalist, Rana Rahimpour. The producers today were Harry Stott and Julia Webster. The executive producer was Tim Walklate. Sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. I've been Rosie Wright. Thanks for listening. And if you can, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.